Thank you very much, and thank you for having me. My name is Peter Sund. I act in the capacity of CEO of Finnish Information Security Cluster. The acronym usually referred to is FISC.
Not something fishy.
No, it comes with the letter C at the end. But anyway, FISC is a trade association, or one could also say that the business that we are in is policy shaping. So we support those companies that operate in the field of cybersecurity, digital security, information security here in Finland. And our objective is to create successful market conditions to grow, develop, and support the actual customers and users, which is in fact the whole society, for better cybersecurity.
And in Baysen, we are today hosting quite a lot of interesting physical devices in the cyber world, and throughout 20 years we have seen the growing importance of digital assets also. And many companies are talking about digitalization, but for companies that usually means a little bit of different things. And even though we started from situational awareness for large telecom networks and for kind of large physical assets, nowadays smaller and smaller products have their digital twins ingrained in our platform, and then those companies, they rely completely on companies like us to provide the digital side, and many of the products don't even exist without the digital side, so customers couldn't even use them. So they are so used to the user interfaces and mobile applications and web applications that are coming through the digital side. And when I started my security career in the Finnish Air Force, it was all about situational awareness in general. So how do you see the evolution? So is it getting faster and faster now? Companies are jumping to digital products from their physical assets.
Well, that is a really difficult question to sort of summarize, because like in many other areas in human life and activity, for me it seems that there is this kind of multi-paced approach, that some are moving really fast, some are then moving much more slower, and that depends on different, let's say, market segments, different government sectors, geographics, nation states, and all these different kinds of frameworks, also cities, for example. Some are moving in the sort of forefront, and some are still maybe not even really realize that this is actually happening, and that there is a lot sort of to discover and to make better via digitalization process all in all.
And we have also seen many customers that it depends on the leadership whether they have the guts to try out those new services. Because if someone has created, let's say, car tires for 100 years, it is quite difficult to say that that I'm selling tires as a service from now on. So you can't just do it by decision. You need to prepare the whole organization for that. But that also creates quite a lot of risks then, because then your business is suddenly dependent on these digital processes, like with many of our customers. And then because hijacking your tire plant is quite hard. You need military people and troops and for that. But hijacking the digital twins or the cloud provider, it can be done remotely from any part of the world.
the risk surface changes significantly. One aspect which I believe that is sort of one of the fundamentals in this sort of risk scenario, risk environment, risk surface is the fact that the world of bits, the world of ones and zeros, does not follow the same rules of physics as the world of atoms. For example, distance has no significance in the digital environment.
Delays in games.
Yeah, of course, like that. But it's still in let's say in the physical world. You were referring to the military background that you have and the Air Force and so on. 500 kilometers is meaningful in national defense.
100 kilometers is not
for Air Force and if you talk about army and sort of the domain of land, 100 kilometers is significant. But in the digital world, 100 or 500, it has no meaning.
And what we have also seen that the cyber world is very fragmented and it continues to fragment. That many companies who think that they let's say host a solution for a customer, there can be like 10 different stakeholders responsible for that, and they are then under like 10 different jurisdictions of different countries. So it is actually quite hard to kind of decipher that which government actually calls the shots for the regulation of certain digital service. If you look at someone like Amazon, who is operating in multiple countries, so you need to do quite a lot of forensic job to realize that who is ultimately responsible from a legal perspective for your service.
Let's say technical experts such as yourself is rather clear that this is how, and that actually connects to what I was referring to, the physical distance, because the physical distance in the real world, it also meets the borders of nation states. But in the digital world, really, when you build these kind of services, that one hosts something and they have their own supply network and so on, that really does cross multiple jurisdictions and so on, and it's very hard to understand how the infrastructure actually in the digital sphere is, and what are the sort of legal operational consequences that are, or legal technical consequences of that. And it's not only that, it's actually, in my view, the fragmentation of the actors, but it's also the fragmentation of jurisdictional competencies, legal competencies. Like you said, that, for example, in one jurisdiction, there may be legally existing coercive powers to breach the confidentiality of certain data, and in another one it doesn't exist in the same way. And additionally to that, then we are also sort of facing a situation that which jurisdictions and which authorities you can trust that they actually follow the letter of the
law. They have the capabilities, because
yes.
It is also enforcement requires quite a lot of people who are trained for that. So we know in many countries there are strict privacy laws, but there are no ways of actually enforcing them, for instance.
That is true, and the privacy issue is something that, from the sort of fundamental rights perspective, when you look at human beings, individuals, that is really critical, important issue. But at the same time, quite often, unfortunately, we tend to forget that for legal entities, it's not the personal data.
Yeah.
It's actually the sort of maybe the best term to describe is sort of the operational data, all that data which doesn't include any information about human beings.
Yeah. So it's the intellectual property and
It's
previously.
all those information and privacy for legal entities is not only privacy of employees and customer information and so on, but it's really about the data which sort of makes the company run. And that is a fundamental rights issue as well, because that is property.
Yeah, and it's in previous times those rights were protected by patents and all kinds of models in different kind of invention models in countries, but those are kind of very sadly outdated to the current quick cyber world. So you're right that we have how to, because if you analyze, let's say, a data feed from a company for a year, it's actually quite easy to put together almost a digital twin of a company and then copy that to somewhere else. And I think that many companies have not assessed this risk when they kind of publish their existing data and host their different functions in different places. It's usually done by budget, what is economical. But sometimes even the reputable actors, they kind of adjust the pricing so that they can gather most intelligence. If we look at, for instance, Amazon, it's very interesting. It is in plain sight right now that they are slowly creating their own consumer product line called Amazon Basics, and so they analyze the products that are best sold in their platform and then decide which ones they are going to create themselves. It sounds evil, but it kind of goes through, and there's nothing illegal in it.
Yeah.
But the companies still go there and put their data in it.
Yeah, it's that is not a cyber issue. That is really, let's say, the trade policy issue. All in all, talking about level playing fields and winner taking it all, and who owns the platforms where everybody is sort of forced to be on, and those issues. But that is another side of the digitalization, not necessarily cybersecurity, but luckily at least, happy to note that the European Union is rather well actually putting emphasis and creating solutions. But of course, it's part of democratic process, and there's a lot of opinions, there's a lot of stakeholders, there is a lot of viewpoints. And one thing which is, I think, important is that we move forward and we try something, because the scale of those issues and those challenges are so complex that there is no ready-made best practice.
You look at the US, the oil cartels of Rockefeller, and then the breaking up AT&T for the telecom cartels that were kind of forcefully broken. That's not good for business if that is done retrospectively like that. So European Union tries to be on the forefront there. So I also have high hopes that it will actually make businesses better and not kind of be then the kind of punishment punisher, like the U.S. government was for many quote unquote too successful industries.
That is true.
But what is also, I'm quite familiar with the telecom industry, and we have a saying in the telco world that before the internet, telecom world didn't invent anything in 100 years apart from collecting money. And so it actually hurts the innovation also a lot when you don't have the competition and when you kind of allow these kind of huge conglomerates to just dominate one area. Because people were okay with the landline telephone for 50 years, it didn't change.
Yeah, that is true.
And now if you think 50 years with a mobile phone, that someone would say that there is only one mobile phone now and 50 years, many companies would be happy about that.
Yeah, definitely. And I think we are both at that age that we know first-hand experience of what is the connection between a pen and a landline. So we've seen it happen. It is of course great, but it's also a reminder that we are not the let's say the new generation anymore.
Yeah. In my neighborhood, there was one guy in his 90s who still had a landline, and this month, and that was because he actually had it left by the Elisa installer, because he just wanted to have the rotary dial phone, so you can keep the legacy that way. But I was surprised to see a completely working landline phone still.
Definitely. Yeah.
But coming back a little bit on the let's say today's cyber war and war in general, which is unfortunately happening in our continent right now. So if you compare the cyber environment of today compared to, for instance, Afghanistan or Iraq wars, so do you see that cyber is in a more important position right now?
That's a tough one, especially not considering to be a military expert, although I have been employed by the military as well. Things come to my mind which are quite often, the first one is something that I try almost every time to say when this issue comes up, and it is that in fact there is no cyber war, at least for us in Finland. Ukraine is in war, that's a fact.
And includes cyber.
And it includes cyber. But Finland or Sweden or Germany or Spain, or the list goes on and on. We are not really.
So
when we are not in a war, we can't be in cyber.
So we are in the safe bird's nest.
Well, maybe not. But
or we think we are.
Yeah, quite often we like to think, but that's something, because war is defined by international law, and there are clear thresholds of when it can be said that war actually exists, and those criteria are not fulfilled in most of the countries. So that's in a way one aspect of it. That is maybe a little bit like legal perspective for that. But it doesn't change also the fact that very serious cyber attacks occur all the time by malicious actors, by state actors, and they cause significant harm. That is also true.
And they also collect a lot of data that we don't know about. So
yes.
they prepare for years by analyzing the weaknesses and zero-day exploits and things like that.
That is true. And maybe the sort of second point that I would like to highlight is that it seems that no matter what was said before, the war in Ukraine has sort of materialized the old wisdoms again, which means that cyber is not something that as a domain of war which has so significant impact compared to directly killing human beings and destroying property beyond repair. And that seems still to be the valid method of causing terrible harm to.
I was a few years ago. I was in University of Coventry giving a small lecture on cyber matters, and then I was listening to the other presenters, and there was one term that they were using, and it was BTKP. And then when a third presenter kind of used the same and said at the end that that when our cyber operation fails and when we can't do this, we can always BTKP. And then I kind of thought that I need to know what this is, and then I reached out to the next person, a woman from who had been recently returned from Afghanistan. And what is this BTKP? Oh, you didn't know. It's break things and kill people. It's the old way.
Yes.
But it was in all presentations, it was always the backup method. But people didn't want to say that out loud, of course, because it's academic purpose.
Yeah, that is true. And looking at, if I take a little bit longer perspective, having lived in Afghanistan, for example, in the early years of last decade, I wouldn't have said, and I still wouldn't say that in environments such like Afghanistan and other places, where the level of general development, including digitalization, is rather low. It means that it reduces the sort of potential harm equally. The same was when I was living a few years back in Africa. The situation is the same, but the less you have the digital infrastructure, the smaller the...
Even the better sometimes.
Yeah,
if you
sometimes
hijack the Afghanistan Central Bank, it actually has very little effect to people of Afghanistan right now.
Yeah.
Compared to what it have in Germany or...
True. Yeah, that is.
But looking at Ukraine, I think that there are still some interesting notions because most of the technological advances that we hear about, those are the autonomous drones, those are the HIMARS, smart rockets. So I think that compared to previous conflicts, that there are more critical technologies and which are very affordable, like the Bayraktars are really cheap compared to, let's say, earlier drones. So I think that these could be classified as digital weapons.
For me, it sort of drops in a place of general technological advancement, and that's really because in war, where the stakes are the most highest, the one who sort of has technological edge is likely to be likely to have an upper hand. But it's not only the tech; it's also how it's being used. Yeah. Yes.
And seeing, let's say, how countries are now supporting Ukraine a lot, I think partly they are also selfish because they want to see how their products work in action and how they can collect data. And Turkey is supplying Bayraktar drones because it's invaluable field testing, radar avoidance and things like that. But having had a glimpse on Bayraktar back end, I was surprised to see how digital it actually is. So that the drone itself, how it's built, so that's kind of secondary completely. It's all about the one shipping container, which includes the control center. So that's the heart of the system.
Yeah.
And it doesn't matter if you lose one or two or 100 drones. It's the data you collect and build on top of that.
So once again, the thresholds and the sort of critical advancements of digital dimension in technology in general. When you have digital, then you need also security to make sure that it does what it's intended to do.
So you have seen developed places like Finland and Europe and US, but also very underdeveloped places like Afghanistan and Africa. So where are we as Finnish companies at the gauge? So are we, let's say, top of the line in cyber security, or are we middle class, or is there a lot to improve?
Well, the last question is easy. The latter question
Of course.
is easier to answer. Is that yes, there is always room to improve, but at the same time, looking at, let's say, a little bit wider segments in the field of cyber, we have some strengths that are really at the forefront. But of course, in order to leverage all that quite often is challenging, not necessarily from the sort of innovation and technology perspective, but it's other things like our own internal market size, our regulatory environment, our understanding of how should I say, there is actually a really good term, institutional leadership here in Finland, and these kinds of challenges, and also the fact that funny enough, and of course anyone can search the web, for example, that Finnish people, we are in a way kind of engineering mindset people, and most of us actually are engineers.
So we are cyber
if not engineers themselves, at least married to one, or something like that, and it also means that we create solutions quite often to things we don't even understand that there might be market value, or that it might be
like
really, yeah, and it's, and also on the social side, all sorts of things like when you have a baby and you get the baby basket and so on. It truly is an innovation.
Yeah, we could be the market leader in the world for those, and we thought that it's a commercial product.
Yeah, so sometimes it's about commercialization and marketing and these kinds of aspects. But indeed, in Finland there is really cutting edge activities in the field of cyber. I think that can be said with a good backing.
At the end of the 80s, I was working for Alstom for some summer jobs, and you mentioned about the institutional leadership, and I got one prime example of that when Christer Ahlström, the CEO, he called me on Sunday evening and said, that I have a management meeting tomorrow, and I'd like to send this email, which was at the time at Ahlström, it was called A-mail, because email wasn't a common term during those times, because Ahlström had developed its own mail system between mini computers between the factory sites.
Yeah.
But he said that he needs to send this email because if he goes with paper to that management meeting, he will prove that this technology is too hard. So he was begging that I would on Sunday evening drive to him and help him to send that one email so that he can then expect that others in the management team also start using the electronic tools for that. And this was 1988.
Yeah, precisely. So it's a really good example of what it really
and I think that in cybersecurity, the same kind of leadership is definitely required in companies, that the leaders show that, that this is touching them as much, that they need to keep themselves and the processes and people safe at all times.
Yeah, that is true. That is true, and there has been quite a lot of talk about bringing cyber to the boardrooms and so on. I think that's possibly one illustration of the same intent.
Yeah.
However, I'm not sure whether bringing the topic to the boardroom is the go-to sort of best best method to do so,
It can
or
be through,
best practice.
through examples and how it affects the business and what new opportunities it creates.
It is because when we talk about risk, once again coming back to the terms, risk is also, it can be also the perception of negative, a risk of harm of something or loss and so on. But risk is also that when we're taking risk, it's actually something positive. That for example, creating any kind of business is taking and carrying a risk, and it's called business risk. But for the boardrooms, I really honestly think that it may be better or maybe more mature model to sort of weave cybersecurity into the whatever mechanism and method of managing business risk.
Yeah.
And that, I think, is the basket to bring to the boardroom.
What we have pushed quite a lot to many management teams of our customer companies is that they would take this kind of a remote look also to their current situational awareness, that that what kind of data assets you have from your customers, or what kind of assets you have from your production, and what kind of historical data are you managing right now, and what else can you do with it. So if you are someone like Coca-Cola, you have 1 billion customers. So have you figured out what to do with that stash of data if you manage it properly? And I think many companies kind of accumulate a lot of useful data and algorithms and understanding of their customers that goes predominantly unused right now, because the market works in an old-fashioned way. And we have in our SPIME events where we have demonstrated time and again that it seems that, let's say, most product life cycles are less than half lifetime of people. So why is it so? So if you look at this large, almost Putin-style table here in our meeting room, this cost almost 20,000 euros somewhere in 2007. But the manufacturer sold it once, and they have absolutely zero connection to us or this property owner or anything. They've kind of fired and forgotten the product, even though it was that expensive.
Yeah.
And this happens in every business all the time.
Yeah.
And we think that by digitalizing the full life cycle of products, it would actually kind of weave together the complete circle, that that I wouldn't forget that in because if this table manufacturer would come to me and say that that we actually have this service that we would replenish it to you, we would kind of put a new cover on it and paint it so that it looks like new, I would take that immediately. But they don't do that.
Yeah.
So they would have kind of business on a table.
Yeah.
But it's but because of the current non-digital practices, it's thought lost.
Yeah, it's very well said. I don't know if there is anything to add actually on that level of insight and wisdom that you just said. Maybe one point comes to my mind that this is maybe a little bit challenging to the sort of data-driven leadership or management, whatever people want to use, but emphasis on the data-driven. There is also an aspect where while data is being collected a lot and then later on possibly used to some extent and maybe not, but also another, if you turn the process, the thought process into, let's say, look at it from the organizatory leadership perspective. What is the data that the board of management would like to have or would definitely need?
And would be really beneficial.
Yeah, to really make their business better, and that's not necessarily at all the same data as is already being collected.
Yeah, and many of our customers have also mentioned that there is this data deluge, that they have far too much data coming in, and then they cannot hire enough data scientists to make any use of it.
Yeah.
And that's also a danger, that because the more you collect and forget, the more cyber vulnerable those things are, as we have seen. Some of the databases leaking because not proper care has been put in the beginning.
Definitely, it is, and one coming back to maybe what you said already in the beginning of the talk, is the pace of development. Cybersecurity, or let's put it maybe better, cyber insecurity is developing so rapidly that those actors who have been collecting data and being digital for some time already, the new vulnerabilities, they are coming in at the pace, and the vulnerabilities are being exploited at the pace of where these actors have very limited capability of actually making sure that they are on top of their security game.
And also looking at the current platforms where people make money, looking at TikTok or Instagram or YouTube, there are whole new kinds of professions that our generation didn't know about, but actually their livelihood is dependent whether Instagram works or YouTube works. It might sound weird now, but I think that this development just continues, and at some point, if let's say YouTube doesn't work for 2 weeks, people have to go to the unemployment desk and to get welfare checks. And this is something. This is a completely new situation.
Likely so. And that, of course, is the sort of mechanism of let's say marketing professions. Yeah. It's a new wraparound how marketing is being done.
Yeah.
These individuals and groups and whatever they are, essentially, they get their income from advertisers.
And I don't think that those platforms were designed inherently cyber secure. They were designed quickly to fulfill a need, so it's an afterthought to put some two-factor authentications and things like those to them.
And people don't want to use them.
And actually it requires quite a lot of knowledge to enable those things. So it's not just that people are lazy. I think it's also that when they are, they're working tools, so you don't want to make them any more complex than they have to be. But then there are of course risks.
They are, and it's plenty of risks also. external threat landscape, like we discussed, but also the internal, or even when all is protected well from external threats, what is the data being used for?
And you mentioned
Another
that
question.
you worked for Wärtsilä before, renowned engineering and a very physical product company.
Yes.
So today, how much are they a cyber company?
Well, I would say that they are.
But how much? Like how much of the R&D and let's say the delivery is fully dependent on cyber capabilities?
Well, that's something that not being anymore employed with the
But
company.
when you left,
Yeah, that's another aspect, and also respecting their right to sort of comment on these kinds of things. But let's say on the positive side, I think it's clear for almost anyone who would, let's say, just visit the website to see that the company really is a digital tech company, and the product portfolios, they are heavily digitalized, at least in terms of the capabilities of making use of the data creation that is possible and that is extensive. And all that has to be protected, of course, because when you have, let's say, huge sailing vessels, commercial vessels out on the sea, or moving in or out ports, or having power plants, they need to do what they're intended to do, and not less and not more.
and we have seen that sometimes the physical side of let's say generator metal and the fuel pipes and things like that, because everything is designed from the ground up with digital tools, so the physical side actually remains the easiest part nowadays.
It's possible, yeah, it's very possible.
Because it's a logic programming of different components in the diesel engine that are far more developed than the pistons, for instance.
Yeah, definitely.
Because no one, and that sometimes creates also interesting, referring to my telecom comment, that who was the last one who invented something new for the old piston?
Yeah, that's very well said, and yeah, I think we all know that the combustion engines really have been existing more or less in a similar manner for a long time, but at the same time, it seems that this is actually talking about the sort of strategic leadership and this making the world a better place. Actors like companies like that who for example manufacturing companies, so in a way they need to be I don't know actually the English term for being like by-handed, that you are almost equally capable of using both hands. One is really creating something new markets, innovate and so on. Digitalize, do these kinds of things, but at the same time develop the sort of base of the technology that exists.
And also question always that that could I improve the piston still?
Exactly, and it's been done. But that one I know, and if you look at like combustion engine companies, all in all, be it car manufacturers or maritime or whatever, they really are being developed more and more different types of fuels, fuel efficiency, emissions, and all of these things, and it's really going. Of course, it's incremental, but it's moving.
Yeah, sometimes it is just too hard for companies. I've only driven Saabs in my driving life, My last Saab is now already 15 years old, but I have programmed about 30% of the engine control system myself. So I have converted it to ethanol, and it's interesting that when they put the Motorola 68,000 to the system, it had 10 times more space than the earliest program required. So they planned almost 20 years ahead in the early 90s to kind of just have enough computing power to do future things.
Yeah.
But the problem was that it was very much more expensive than all the competition's engine control modules, and they had like 10 times bigger engineering team, which eventually made the car too expensive, and because Saab never made any money with any cars, so it was always subsidized by the other sides of the airplanes and defense industries. But that was a kind of an interesting lesson also, that if you develop only to kind of highest R&D and technology, that's not the optimal way. So you need to have that balance, as you say.
Exactly. Yeah, that is really, no matter what we talk about, classic examples are huge companies like Apple or something that you can't only need to sell as well.
Yeah. But at the same time, I think companies should recognize that when is the time to safely, or let's say relatively safely, introduce new digital aspects, not to get carried away, but always kind of being on the lookout.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And that concludes our podcast episode today. Thank you all for listening. You can as well listen to all our other available podcast episodes on Spotify and Apple Podcast. You can just find us by typing IoT for the rest of us, the Base End Podcast. Don't forget to subscribe and follow our podcast for updates on the next coming exciting episodes. We see you next time.